Tonight, we're going to explore one of humanity's most ambitious plans for reaching the stars. Generation ships. Vessels designed to carry thousands of people on journeys lasting centuries, where the crew who launches will never see the destination. Only their distant descendants will arrive. It sounds like the ultimate adventure, but the reality is far more terrifying than you might think. By the end of tonight, you're going to understand why generation ships might be our only option for interstellar travel, and why that option raises questions we're not prepared to answer. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of space as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. Imagine you're born on a spaceship. Not a sleek vessel from a movie, but a massive structure, miles long, rotating slowly to create artificial gravity. This ship is your entire world. You've never seen Earth. You never will. Your grandparents boarded this ship 70 years ago, leaving behind everything they knew to journey toward a star system so distant that the ship won't arrive for another 400 years. You will live your entire life on board. You'll have children who will also live their entire lives on board. Your great-great-great-great-grandchildren might, if they're lucky, see the destination. But you won't. Your entire existence will be spent in the space between stars, traveling through an emptiness so vast and hostile that one mistake, one system failure, could kill everyone on board. This is the reality of generation ships. And this is what we need to talk about. Let's start with why we're even considering this option in the first place. The problem is simple. Space is unimaginably big. The nearest star to our Sun, Proxima Centauri, is about 4.2 light-years away. That's roughly 25 trillion miles. At the speed of our fastest spacecraft, leaving the solar system, traveling at about 36,000 miles per hour, it would take nearly 80,000 years to reach Proxima Centauri. That's longer than all of recorded human civilization. We need to go faster, much faster. Scientists have proposed various theoretical propulsion systems. Nuclear pulse propulsion, where you detonate nuclear bombs behind your ship and ride the shockwave. Fusion, rockets that use the same process that powers stars. Antimatter engines that could theoretically reach significant fractions of light speed. Light sails pushed by powerful lasers. All of these technologies could, in theory, reduce the travel time. Some proposals suggest reaching 10% of light speed, which would get you to Proxima Centauri in about 42 years. That sounds manageable until you realize what it actually means. 10% of light speed is 18,600 miles per second. At that velocity, hitting a grain of sand would release energy equivalent to several sticks of dynamite. Hitting something the size of a pebble would be catastrophic. Space isn't empty. It's filled with dust, tiny particles, occasional rocks. At extreme velocities, even the thinnest interstellar medium becomes a sandblaster that would shred any spacecraft. You'd need shielding several feet thick, adding enormous mass, and the energy requirements are staggering. Accelerating just 1 kilogram to 10% of light speed requires roughly 450 trillion joules of energy. For a ship massive enough to carry a viable population, thousands of people plus all their supplies and equipment, you're looking at energy requirements that dwarf our entire global energy production. We don't currently have any realistic way to generate or store that much energy in a form useful for propulsion, so we're left with slower speeds. 1% of light speed, maybe 2% if we're optimistic. At 1% of light speed, about 6,700,000 miles per hour, a trip to Proxima Centauri takes over 400 years. To a more interesting star system, one with potentially habitable planets, we're looking at journeys of 500, 1,000, even 2,000 years. No human lives that long. No generation of humans lives that long. You need multiple generations. You need a ship that's not just a vehicle, but a completely self-sustaining world. A world that can support human life for centuries without any external input. This is where the concept gets complicated. Because building a ship that can travel between stars is one thing. Building a ship that can keep people alive and healthy for 1,000 years is something else entirely. Let's talk about the ship itself. The first thing to understand is the sheer scale required. You can't send a dozen people on a generation ship. You need genetic diversity to avoid inbreeding. You need enough people so that random deaths don't threaten the mission. You need redundancy in skills and knowledge. Most proposals suggest a minimum population of around 500 to 1,000 people. Some studies argue you need several thousand. That means your ship needs living space, agricultural areas, water recycling systems, power generation, manufacturing facilities, hospitals, schools, everything a small town would need. Except this town is floating through interstellar space with no possibility of resupply. The ship would need to be massive. We're talking about structures miles in length, O'Neill cylinders, rotating habitats several miles long and half a mile in diameter, spinning to create artificial gravity through centrifugal force. Or torus designs, giant rings rotating around a central hub. The engineering challenges are enormous. You need materials strong enough to withstand the structural stresses of rotation without tearing apart. You need power systems that can run for centuries without major maintenance. Nuclear fission reactors could work for decades, but eventually fuel runs out. Fusion reactors, if we ever perfect them, could run much longer. Some designs propose solar panels, but once you get far from any star, sunlight becomes useless. You might need to rely on stored energy or nuclear fuel for the entire journey. The ship needs to be completely self-sufficient. Every drop of water must be recycled. Every molecule of oxygen must be recaptured and reused. Food must be grown on board using hydroponics or other closed-loop agricultural systems. Waste must be processed and converted back into usable resources. Any system failure in these recycling processes could be catastrophic. Imagine the water recycling system breaks down. If you can't fix it quickly, people start dying of thirst within days. The same goes for oxygen recycling, food production, temperature control. Every system is a single point of failure for the entire mission. You need redundancy, multiple backups for every critical system. But redundancy adds mass, and mass requires more energy to accelerate and more fuel to carry. There's a brutal trade-off between safety and feasibility. And then there's shielding. Interstellar space is filled with radiation, cosmic rays, high-energy particles that can pass through solid matter. Without Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere to protect you, this radiation slowly damages your DNA, increasing cancer risk, causing neurological problems, shortening lifespan. You need shielding. Thick layers of water, polyethylene, or other materials that absorb radiation. This adds even more mass. Some designs suggest using the ship's water supply as radiation shielding, surrounding the living areas with tanks of water that serve double duty. But it's still added mass, added complexity. Micrometeorite impacts are another concern. Space is mostly empty, but over centuries of travel, the odds of hitting something increase. A tiny rock, traveling at high relative velocity, could punch through the hull. You need multiple layers of shielding, self-sealing materials, compartmentalization, so that a hull breach doesn't decompress the entire ship. And you need constant maintenance. Ships degrade over time. Metal fatigues. Seals crack. Electronics fail. You need a crew capable of repairing and replacing every component of the ship. That means manufacturing facilities on board, 3D printers, machine shops, raw materials. You need to be able to fabricate replacement parts for anything that might break. Because you can't call for help. You can't order replacement parts. You're completely on your own. This level of self-sufficiency has never been achieved. The International Space Station requires regular resupply missions from Earth. It's been continuously occupied for over 20 years, but it's not self-sufficient. A generation ship would need to be self-sufficient for 20 times that duration, at least. But all of these engineering challenges pale in comparison to the human challenges. Because the hardest part of a generation ship isn't building it or powering it. It's the people. Let's talk about what life would actually be like on board a generation ship. You're born on board. Your world is the interior of the ship. Metal walls, artificial lighting, recycled air. You've seen pictures of Earth, videos maybe, stored in the ship's databanks. Blue skies, green forests, vast oceans. But you've never experienced any of it. You never will. The sky above you is a ceiling. The ground beneath you is a floor that curves upward in the distance if you're in a rotating cylinder habitat. The horizon is wrong. Everything feels enclosed because everything is enclosed. This is your entire existence. You will live here for 70, 80, maybe 90 years if you're lucky. Then you'll be gone, and your children will take your place. Your children will have children, and the cycle continues. For generations. Most people on board will never see the destination. They'll be born in transit, live in transit, be gone in transit. Their entire lives spent traveling toward a place they'll never reach. How do you maintain morale in that situation? How do you give people purpose when their entire existence is just a link in a chain, a single generation in a journey spanning centuries? This is the psychological challenge of generation ships. And it's huge. Studies of isolated communities, Antarctic research stations, submarines, show that humans struggle with confinement. Depression rates increase. Conflicts arise. Social bonds fray under stress. And that's with the knowledge that the isolation is temporary. On a generation ship, there's no end in sight. Not for you. Not for your children. Maybe not even for your grandchildren. You're asking people to accept a life of confinement for the sake of descendants they'll never meet. That's a lot to ask. Some people won't accept it. They'll become resentful. They might sabotage the mission, intentionally or through negligence. They might refuse to have children, breaking the generational chain. They might form factions, groups with different visions for the mission, and those factions might come into conflict. You need social structures that can maintain cohesion across centuries. You need governance systems that are flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances, but stable enough to prevent chaos. You need education systems that pass on critical knowledge from generation to generation without losing anything essential. You need cultural practices that give people meaning and purpose. And you need all of this to work perfectly for hundreds of years. Because if social cohesion breaks down, if conflict erupts into violence, if knowledge is lost, the mission fails. Everyone is gone. Let's talk about governance. Who's in charge of a generation ship? The original crew that departed Earth will have some form of command structure. A captain, officers, specialists. But those people will be gone within the first few decades. Their children will take over. Then, their children's children. Over time, the command structure will evolve. Will it remain democratic? Will it become authoritarian? Will it fracture into competing power centers? There are no historical precedents for this. We've never had a completely isolated, self-contained society traveling through space for centuries. The closest analogues are island nations, isolated for generations. And history shows that isolation can lead to stagnation, cultural drift, sometimes collapse. Polynesian societies navigated thousands of miles of ocean and settled remote islands. But once settled, some of those societies lost the knowledge of long-distance navigation. Easter Island's population collapsed after overexploiting their limited resources. These are warnings. They show that isolated societies can fail, can lose critical knowledge, can make decisions that doom future generations. A generation ship is an isolated society taken to an extreme. One bad decision, one lost skill, one breakdown in social order, and the entire mission could fail. And there's no rescue. No one's coming to help. You're on your own. Consider the challenge of succession. On Earth, when leaders pass, new leaders are elected or appointed. There's an established process. Institutions that persist beyond individual lifetimes. But on a generation ship, you're starting from scratch. The first generation establishes the governance system. Maybe it's a democratic council. Maybe it's a hierarchical command structure, like a naval vessel. Maybe it's something hybrid. Whatever they choose becomes the template. But templates don't always survive contact with reality. The second generation might find the system inadequate. They didn't design it. They inherited it. And they might want changes. If the system is flexible enough to allow peaceful reform, maybe changes happen smoothly. But if the system is rigid, if it resists change, pressure builds. Frustration grows. Eventually, that pressure might explode into conflict. A power struggle. A coup. Violence. And in a confined space with limited resources, violence is especially dangerous. There's nowhere to retreat. No neutral territory. Everyone is forced into proximity with their enemies. That's a recipe for escalation. A conflict that might have been contained on a planet where people can separate and distance themselves becomes all-consuming on a ship. There's also the problem of expertise versus democracy. Running a generation ship requires technical knowledge. Engineering, medicine, agriculture, life support systems. These aren't skills everyone has. They require years of training. So, do you put technical experts in charge? Do you create a technocracy where the people who understand the systems make the decisions? That makes sense from an efficiency standpoint. The people who know how things work should be the ones managing them. But it creates a class system. The technical elite versus everyone else. and that can breed resentment. People don't like being told what to do by an elite class, even if that class has legitimate expertise. History is full of examples of populist movements rising against expert-led governments. People value having a voice, having agency. Even if the experts make better technical decisions, people want to feel like they have control over their own lives. On a generation ship, balancing technical expertise with democratic participation is crucial. You need the engineers to keep the systems running. But you also need the broader population to feel invested in the mission. If people feel excluded from decision-making, they disengage. They stop caring about the mission's success. They might even actively work against it. Sabotage, subtle or overt. Not necessarily out of malice. Maybe just out of indifference. If you don't feel like the mission serves you, why should you serve the mission? That attitude, multiplied across dozens or hundreds of people, can cripple a generation ship. Tasks don't get done. Maintenance is neglected. Systems degrade faster. Problems accumulate. And the mission spirals toward failure. So, governance isn't just about who makes decisions. It's about maintaining buy-in, making sure everyone on board feels like they matter, like their contribution is valued, like they have a stake in the mission's success. That's incredibly difficult to maintain across generations, especially when the people born on board didn't choose to be part of the mission. They were born into it. They might not feel the same commitment that the original crew did. And if enough people feel that way, the social fabric unravels. Another governance challenge is dealing with dissent. On Earth, if you disagree with your government, you have options. You can protest. You can vote for different leaders. In extreme cases, you can leave. Move to another country. But on a generation ship, there's nowhere to go. If you disagree with the leadership, your options are limited. You can voice your concerns, hope they're heard. You can try to organize others who share your views. But if the leadership is unresponsive, if they dismiss or suppress dissent, what then? You can't leave. You can't opt out. You're stuck. This creates a powder keg. Suppressed dissent doesn't disappear. It festers. It grows. Eventually, it explodes. Maybe in the form of a rebellion. People rising up against the leadership, demanding change. If the rebellion succeeds, you get a new government. But the transition is violent, chaotic. People get hurt. Systems might be damaged in the fighting, and the new leadership might not be better than the old one. Revolutions don't always improve things. Sometimes they just replace one flawed system with another. If the rebellion fails, the consequences are severe. The leadership cracks down. Dissidents are punished, imprisoned, fear spreads. People stop speaking out. The society becomes oppressive. And oppressive societies are fragile. They rely on fear to maintain control. But fear breeds resentment. And resentment, over time, can reignite conflict. The cycle continues. A healthier approach is to build governance systems that are responsive to dissent, that allow for peaceful change, that incorporate multiple voices and perspectives. But building such systems is hard. It requires wisdom, foresight, and a willingness to share power. Not all leaders have those qualities. And even if the first generation creates a fair, responsive system, there's no guarantee future generations will maintain it. Power corrupts. People in positions of authority often want to hold on to that authority. They might change the rules to favor themselves. They might suppress opposition to stay in power. Over centuries, even a well-designed system can degrade into something oppressive and dysfunctional. And once that happens, reversing it is difficult. Let's talk about the role of religion and belief systems. Humans need meaning. We need to believe that our lives matter, that our actions have purpose. On Earth, people find meaning in many ways. Career achievements, family, community, religion, personal growth. On a generation ship, many of those sources of meaning are limited. Career options are constrained by the ship's needs. You don't get to choose your profession based on passion. You train for whatever role the ship requires. Family is important, but the structure is dictated by population needs. You might be encouraged or discouraged from having children based on demographic goals. Community is limited to the few thousand people on board. You can't seek out new communities, new perspectives. You're stuck with the same people your entire life. Personal growth is constrained by the ship's limited resources and opportunities. So where do people find meaning? Religion often fills that gap. Belief in something greater than yourself. A divine purpose. An afterlife where your sacrifices are rewarded. For people living confined, difficult lives, religion can provide comfort and hope. It can make the suffering bearable. It can give people a reason to endure. But religion can also be divisive. Different belief systems can come into conflict. What if the ship launches with a religiously diverse population? At first, maybe there's tolerance, respect for different beliefs. But over generations, tensions can arise. Religious groups might compete for influence. They might try to convert others. They might view other beliefs. In a confined space, religious conflict can be devastating. It can split the population into factions. It can lead to violence. History is filled with religious wars. On a generation ship, such conflict could destroy the mission. On the other hand, religion can also unify. If everyone on board shares the same belief system, it can create a strong sense of community. Shared rituals, shared values, shared purpose. Religion can be the glue that holds the society together across generations. Some generation ship proposals suggest launching with a religiously homogeneous population for this reason. Everyone shares the same faith, reducing the potential for religious conflict. But that creates its own problems. Religious homogeneity can lead to rigidity. If everyone believes the same thing, dissent becomes heresy. People who question the faith are punished. The society becomes intolerant. And intolerant societies are brittle. They can't adapt to new information or changing circumstances. They cling to dogma even when it's counterproductive. This could endanger the mission. What if the religious doctrine on board conflicts with mission objectives? What if people believe that genetic engineering is sinful, but genetic engineering is necessary to maintain population health? What if religious leaders gain power and prioritize faith over technical expertise? These scenarios aren't far-fetched. History shows that religious authority can override rational decision-making. People have rejected medical treatments, scientific discoveries, practical solutions because they conflicted with religious belief. On a generation ship, such rejection could be fatal. If your belief system prevents you from maintaining the ship, from adapting to new challenges, from making hard but necessary decisions, the mission fails. Balancing the psychological benefits of religion with the practical need for evidence-based decision-making is another challenge. You need people to have hope, to have meaning, but you also need them to accept reality. That balance is delicate, and maintaining it across centuries as religious beliefs evolve and change is incredibly difficult. New prophets might arise. New religious movements might form. Schisms might split the faithful. Each generation brings the possibility of religious upheaval, and each upheaval threatens the social cohesion necessary for the mission's success. Then there's the question of reproduction. You need people to have children. Enough children to replace the people who pass and maintain a stable population, but not too many children because resources are limited. You can't support a population explosion on board a generation ship. Food production is finite. Water recycling has limits. Living space is fixed. You need to control population growth. How do you do that ethically? Do you impose birth limits, allowing each couple to have only 1 or 2 children? Do you require permits to have children, with a governing body deciding who gets to reproduce? Do you screen for genetic diseases, preventing people with certain conditions from having children to protect the gene pool? These are uncomfortable questions. They touch on reproductive rights, personal freedom, eugenics. But on a generation ship, they're unavoidable. Resources are limited. Every person on board consumes food, water, oxygen. Every additional person increases the burden on life support systems. If the population grows beyond the ship's capacity to support it, everyone suffers. Starvation, resource conflicts, system failures. So population must be controlled. But who decides? And how do you enforce those decisions without creating resentment and resistance? Imagine being told you can't have a second child because the ship is at capacity. You want another child. You love being a parent. You have the means to care for another. But the answer is no. The collective needs outweigh your individual desires. That's a bitter pill to swallow. Some people will accept it. They'll understand the necessity. They'll make peace with the limitation. But others will chafe against it. They'll feel robbed of something fundamental: the right to family, to parenthood, to shaping their own future. Some might break the rules, have unauthorized children. What happens then? Do you punish the parents? Do you penalize the child who had no choice in the matter? Do you force terminations, sterilizations? These are dark territories, the kind of decisions that can tear a society apart. And yet, without population control, the ship fails. Too many people, and you exceed life support capacity. Air gets thin. Food runs short. Water rationing becomes severe. People suffer. Children starve. The social contract breaks down. Everyone fights for survival. And in that chaos, the mission dies. So, population control, however ethically troubling, is necessary. The question is how to implement it in a way that minimizes harm and maintains social cohesion. Some proposals suggest a lottery system. Each year, a certain number of birth permits are made available. Couples enter the lottery. Winners get permission to conceive. Losers wait and try again next year. It's random, which feels fair in a sense. No one is being selectively denied based on personal characteristics. But randomness also means that people who desperately want children might wait years, even decades, before winning the lottery. Meanwhile, others who are ambivalent about parenthood might win on their first try. That feels unfair in a different way. Another approach is merit-based selection. Birth permits go to couples who demonstrate responsibility, health, genetic diversity, valuable skills. This optimizes for the mission's success. You're selecting for the best possible next generation. But it's eugenic. You're making value judgments about who deserves to reproduce, who's worthy. And that's a dangerous road. Who decides what makes someone worthy? What criteria do you use? Intelligence? Physical health? Psychological stability? Contribution to the ship? Any criteria will be subjective, open to bias, and enforcing such a system creates resentment among those deemed unworthy. They're told they're not good enough to have children. That's devastating. It breeds anger, alienation, a desire for revenge. Some might sabotage the mission out of spite. If the mission doesn't value them, why should they support it? There's also the issue of genetic diversity. With a population of only a few thousand people, you have limited genetic variation. Over time, inbreeding becomes a risk. You need to carefully manage reproduction to maintain genetic health. Some proposals suggest bringing frozen embryos or genetic material, allowing future generations to introduce new genetic diversity. But that adds complexity. You need the technology to store genetic material for centuries. You need the medical expertise to use it. And you need social acceptance of the practice. What if people resent the idea of children born from frozen genetic material brought from Earth? What if they view those children as outsiders, not truly part of the ship's community? Social cohesion could fracture. Another consideration is the psychological impact of reproductive restrictions. Humans have a biological drive to reproduce. It's fundamental to our species. Denying people the ability to have children, or limiting how many they can have, goes against that drive. It creates frustration, grief, a sense of loss. Some people will cope. They'll find other sources of fulfillment. Career, relationships, hobbies. But others won't. They'll feel incomplete. Their lives will feel meaningless without children. And that despair can spread. It can poison the social atmosphere. Depression becomes endemic. Morale collapses. People stop caring about the mission. What's the point if you can't even have the family you want? This is why reproductive policy on a generation ship is so critical. It's not just about numbers. It's about people's fundamental sense of purpose and fulfillment. Get it wrong, and you lose the social cohesion necessary for the mission to succeed. Get it right, and you give people a reason to invest in the future, to care about the generations that come after them, even if those generations aren't their own biological children. Let's talk about education in detail. Every generation needs to learn the skills necessary to operate and maintain the ship. Engineering, agriculture, medicine, computer science, physics, biology. The knowledge base required to keep a generation ship running is enormous. And that knowledge must be passed down perfectly from generation to generation. You can't afford to lose critical information. If the generation that knows how to repair the fusion reactor fails to teach their children, and something goes wrong with the reactor, everyone could be gone. You need redundancy in knowledge. Multiple people trained in every critical skill. Written manuals, video tutorials, interactive training programs. But even with redundancy, knowledge can be lost. Languages change over time. Technical terminology shifts. What if, after 500 years, the language spoken on board has drifted so far from the original that people can barely understand the old manuals? What if cultural changes lead people to devalue certain skills, viewing them as unnecessary or outdated? These aren't hypothetical concerns. We've seen knowledge loss happen throughout human history. The Library of Alexandria burned. The knowledge of Roman concrete was lost for over 1,000 years. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen, and much of their knowledge vanished with them. A generation ship can't afford that. Every piece of knowledge is precious. Every skill is essential. Losing even one could endanger the mission. So education can't be passive. You can't just hand students a textbook and hope they learn. You need active, engaged teaching, hands-on training, apprenticeships where experienced technicians work directly with students. The knowledge has to be deeply embedded, not just memorized, but understood. Students need to know not just how to follow procedures, but why those procedures work. Because when something goes wrong, when a system fails in an unexpected way, you need people who can think critically, who can diagnose problems, who can improvise solutions. If all they know is how to follow a checklist, they'll be helpless when the situation isn't in the checklist. But training people to think critically is difficult. It requires skilled teachers, and teachers themselves need to be trained. You need a whole educational infrastructure: schools, curricula, assessment systems. And that infrastructure needs to be maintained across generations. Each generation of teachers trains the next generation of teachers. Any degradation in quality, any loss of pedagogical knowledge accumulates over time. After 500 years, the education system might be a shadow of what it was originally. Students might be learning less effectively. Critical skills might be taught poorly or not at all. And the ship suffers. There's also the question of what to teach beyond technical skills. Do you teach history? Art? Philosophy? Literature? These subjects don't directly contribute to the ship's operation, but they're part of what makes us human. They give life depth and meaning. Without them, life on board becomes purely utilitarian. You exist to work, to keep the ship running. Nothing more. That's a bleak existence. It's also a fragile one. Humans need more than just survival. We need beauty, culture, intellectual stimulation. Without these things, morale collapses. People become depressed, apathetic. They stop caring. So you need to teach art, history, philosophy. You need to maintain cultural richness. But cultural education competes with technical education for limited time and resources. Students only have so many hours in a day. If they're spending time studying literature, that's time not spent learning engineering. And you need engineers more than you need poets, at least in terms of immediate mission needs. So there's a tension. How do you balance technical necessity with cultural vitality? How do you give people the skills they need to survive, while also giving them the richness they need to want to survive? Different ships might answer this differently. Some might prioritize technical training, accepting that culture will be minimal. Others might try to maintain a balance, risking that technical skills might be less robust. There's no perfect answer, just trade-offs. And the consequences of those trade-offs play out over centuries. Another educational challenge is motivation. On Earth, students are motivated by future opportunities. Study hard, get into a good college, land a good job, build a career. But, on a generation ship, career paths are limited. You're trained for whatever role the ship needs. Maybe you want to be a teacher, but the ship needs more agricultural technicians. So you become an agricultural technician. Your desires are secondary to the ship's needs. That's demotivating. Why study hard if your future is predetermined? Why excel if there's no reward for excellence? Some students will be intrinsically motivated. They'll love learning for its own sake. They'll take pride in their work, regardless of recognition. But most people need external motivation. And, on a generation ship, traditional motivators don't apply. No social mobility. No economic incentives. Your status is largely fixed by the role the ship assigns you. So, you need to create new motivators. Maybe social recognition, public honors for those who excel. Maybe increased privileges, better living quarters, access to scarce luxuries. Maybe just the knowledge that you're contributing to something larger than yourself, that the mission depends on you. For some, that's enough. The sense of purpose, of being essential. But for others, it's not. They need more tangible rewards. And if those rewards aren't available, they disengage. They do the minimum required. Nothing more. And minimum effort across an entire society leads to decline. Systems aren't maintained as well. Innovation stalls. Problems accumulate. The ship deteriorates. So keeping students motivated, keeping everyone motivated, is critical. And it requires constant effort. Recognition systems, cultural practices that celebrate contribution, narratives that reinforce the mission's importance. All of these need to be actively maintained. They don't happen automatically. And if they're neglected, motivation collapses. Another aspect of daily life worth exploring is recreation. What do people do for fun on a generation ship? On Earth, we have endless options. Travel, sports, movies, concerts, dining out, hiking, gaming. On a ship, options are limited. You can't travel beyond the ship's confines. No new places to visit. No exotic destinations. You're seeing the same corridors, the same rooms, the same people every day. For decades. That's monotonous. Humans crave novelty. We get bored with sameness. And boredom breeds dissatisfaction, restlessness, even depression. So you need to provide recreation, entertainment, ways for people to relax and enjoy themselves. Virtual reality might help. You could create simulated environments. Forests, beaches, cities. People could spend time in these virtual spaces, experiencing places they'll never see in reality. It's not the same as the real thing, but it's better than nothing. The technology for convincing VR exists today. By the time we're building generation ships, it will be even better. You could simulate entire worlds. Let people explore, have adventures, feel like they're somewhere else. But VR has limitations. It's still artificial. You can't smell the ocean, feel the wind, taste real food in VR. It's a pale shadow of reality. And extended time in VR might cause psychological issues. Dissociation, difficulty distinguishing real from virtual, preference for virtual over real. If people start spending most of their time in VR, avoiding real-world interactions, social cohesion suffers. You end up with a population that's more connected to virtual spaces than to each other. That's dangerous. The mission requires real-world cooperation. People working together, communicating, trusting each other. If everyone retreats into their own virtual world, that cooperation breaks down. So VR needs to be managed carefully, used as a supplement, not a replacement, for real-world recreation. Other forms of recreation might include sports. You could have low-gravity sports in areas with reduced artificial gravity, or traditional sports adapted to the ship's environment. Sports provide physical exercise, social interaction, competition, teamwork, all valuable. But space is limited. You can't build a full-size football field or basketball court. Maybe small courts for scaled-down versions of games. Or new sports designed specifically for the ship's constraints. Art and music are also important. People can create, paint, sculpt, compose, perform. Art gives people a way to express themselves, to process emotions, to contribute beauty to their environment. Music brings people together. Concerts, communal singing, dancing. These activities build community. They remind people that they're part of something larger, that they share common experiences and values. But art and music also require resources. Materials for painting and sculpture, instruments for music, space for performance. All of this competes with other needs. Do you allocate precious cargo space to musical instruments, or to spare parts for life support systems? Again, trade-offs. Survival versus quality of life. You need both. Survival without quality of life is just existence. But quality of life without survival is impossible. Finding the balance is essential. And that balance will be debated constantly. Different generations will have different priorities. What one generation values, the next might view as wasteful. And those shifting priorities can cause conflict. And then there's the psychological impact of knowing that you're part of a journey you'll never see completed. Imagine being told from birth that your purpose is to keep the ship running so that your descendants, people you'll never meet, can reach a distant star. Some people will embrace that purpose. They'll find meaning in being part of something larger than themselves. They'll take pride in their role, knowing that without them, the mission fails. But others will resent it. They'll feel trapped, born into a mission they didn't choose, forced to spend their entire life working toward a goal they'll never experience. They might rebel. They might reject the mission's purpose. They might argue that the ship should turn around, return to Earth, or find a closer destination. Or they might advocate for stopping the ship entirely, finding some asteroid or rogue planet, and settling there instead. These conflicts are inevitable. Different generations will have different priorities. The generation that left Earth made a choice to undertake this journey. But their descendants didn't make that choice. It was made for them. How do you maintain commitment to a mission across generations when most people on board never chose to be part of it? You need cultural practices that reinforce the mission's importance. Rituals, celebrations, stories that connect each generation to the larger purpose. You need to make the journey itself meaningful, not just the destination. But even with the best cultural engineering, some people will resist. Some will want out. And there's nowhere to go. You're stuck on board. For life. Let's talk about what happens when things go wrong. Because on a generation ship, things will go wrong. Systems fail. People make mistakes. Accidents happen. Imagine a hull breach. Micrometeorite, impact, structural failure, sabotage. Suddenly, a section of the ship is exposed to vacuum. Everyone in that section has seconds to get out before the air is gone. Bulkheads seal automatically, containing the breach. But people are trapped inside. They're gone within minutes. Maybe it's 10 people. Maybe it's 50. On a ship with a population of only 1,000, losing 50 people is catastrophic. That's 5% of your total population. 5% of your genetic diversity. 5% of your skilled workers. Entire families could be wiped out. Critical skills could be lost if the wrong people are gone. And the psychological impact on the survivors would be enormous. Grief, trauma, fear. People would demand answers. Was it an accident? Could it have been prevented? Is the ship safe? Morale would plummet. Trust in the leadership would erode. Some people might panic, demand that the mission be aborted. But there's nowhere to abort to. You can't turn around. Even if you could, Earth is centuries away. You're committed. You have to keep going. Or consider a disease outbreak. Bring a pathogen on board, something that was dormant or mutated during the journey. In a closed environment with limited population, a disease can spread rapidly. You have medical facilities, but they're basic. You don't have the resources of a planetary civilization. You can't manufacture complex pharmaceuticals. You have what you brought with you, plus whatever you can synthesize with onboard equipment. If the disease is something your medicine can't treat, people start dying. 10, 20, 100. The population drops. Panic spreads faster than the disease. People isolate themselves, refuse to cooperate, hoard resources. Social cohesion breaks down. And if the disease kills enough people, you lose critical skills. The engineer, who knows how to repair the water recycling system, is gone. The doctor, who knows how to treat radiation sickness, is gone. The teacher who was training the next generation of technicians is gone. Knowledge is lost. The ship's ability to function deteriorates. More systems fail because there's no one left who knows how to fix them. A death spiral begins. And there's no outside help. No rescue mission. You either recover or you don't. Another scenario. Social breakdown. A conflict arises. Maybe it's over resources, access to better living quarters, rationing policies. Maybe it's ideological, different factions with different visions for the mission. Maybe it's personal, feuds between families that escalate. Tensions rise. Violence erupts. In a confined space, violence is incredibly dangerous. You can't just leave. You can't put distance between hostile groups. Everyone is trapped together. Fighting could damage critical systems. A fire in a closed environment is deadly. Weapons, even improvised ones, could breach the hull. And once violence starts, it's hard to stop. Feuds perpetuate across generations. Children are taught to hate the children of their parents' enemies. The ship becomes a war zone. Resources are diverted from maintenance to conflict. Systems degrade. The ship falls apart. Everyone is gone. This isn't speculation. History shows that isolated communities can descend into violence. The Donner Party, trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains, resorted to cannibalism. The Pitcairn Island mutineers descended into murder and chaos within a few years of settlement. These are extreme examples, but they illustrate the dangers of isolation and stress. A generation ship would be under constant stress. Limited resources, confinement, the knowledge that one mistake could kill everyone. That's a pressure cooker. And humans under pressure don't always behave rationally. You'd need conflict resolution mechanisms, strong social norms against violence, effective law enforcement without being oppressive, a justice system that people trust. But creating and maintaining these systems across centuries in an environment where the original Earth-based culture is fading into memory is incredibly difficult. Cultures drift. Values change. What one generation considers essential, the next might view as outdated. The generation born 200 years into the journey won't have any direct connection to Earth. They'll have heard stories, seen recordings, but Earth will be as alien to them as any distant planet. Their identity will be tied to the ship, not to humanity's homeworld. They might develop a completely different culture with different values, different priorities. And that culture might not value the mission's original goal. They might decide that reaching the destination isn't worth the sacrifice. They might choose to stop, to settle somewhere else, or to continue drifting indefinitely. This is mission drift. The gradual change in purpose and priorities over time. And it's a real risk for generation ships. How do you keep people committed to a goal that was set by ancestors they never knew, for the benefit of descendants they'll never meet? Let's talk about the destination. Assume everything goes right. The ship survives the journey. Social cohesion is maintained. No catastrophic failures. After 500, 1,000, 1,500 years, you arrive. A new star system. Planets orbit the star. One of them is potentially habitable. Earth-like. Maybe. The right temperature, the right atmosphere, liquid water on the surface. You're ready to settle. But here's the problem. The people arriving aren't the people who left Earth. Generations have passed. The passengers on board have spent their entire lives in space. They've adapted to life on the ship. Low gravity or artificial gravity. Recycled air and water. Limited space. Their bodies have changed. Bones might be weaker due to lower gravity exposure. Immune systems might be compromised from living in a sterile environment. Their psychology has adapted to life in a closed, controlled environment. And now you're asking them to leave the ship and settle on a planet. A planet with real gravity, weather, ecosystems, microorganisms. It's going to be an adjustment. A difficult one. Some people might not want to leave the ship. The ship is home. It's all they've ever known. The planet is alien, dangerous, unknown. Why take the risk? They might argue that the ship should stay in orbit, continue as a permanent space habitat. Only a small group descends to the surface. but that splits the population. And you need everyone to make the colony viable. Settling a planet is hard. You need enough people to establish infrastructure, grow food, build shelters, defend against environmental hazards. If half the population refuses to leave the ship, the colony might fail. Then there's the question of whether the planet is actually habitable. Remote observations during the journey suggested it was. But you don't know for sure until you arrive. The atmosphere might be breathable, but filled with allergens or toxins that cause long-term health problems. The native microorganisms might be harmless or deadly. The climate might be more extreme than anticipated. There might be no native life at all, just a barren rock with the right temperature and atmosphere. Settling such a world would be like terraforming, decades or centuries of work to make it livable. Or there might be native life, complex ecosystems, maybe even intelligent life. And that creates ethical dilemmas. Do you have the right to colonize a world that already has life? Are you displacing native species? Are you contaminating a pristine biosphere? These questions might seem abstract, but for the people on board the generation ship, they're immediate and pressing. They've traveled for centuries to reach this destination. They're committed. But they're also confronted with the reality of what colonization means. And different people will have different answers. Some will argue for settling, regardless of native life, that survival of humanity's descendants justifies it. Others will argue for leaving the planet untouched, finding another destination. But after traveling for 1,000 years, finding another destination means another 1,000-year journey. No one wants that. Tensions rise. The mission that was supposed to end with arrival now faces its greatest crisis. Because arrival isn't the end. It's the beginning of a whole new set of challenges. And the people on board, shaped by centuries of life in space, might not be equipped to handle them. Let's delve deeper into the technological challenges that would compound over time. When the ship launches, every system is new. Everything works as designed. Redundancies are in place. Spare parts are stocked. But as decades pass, things change. Metal fatigues from constant stress. Radiation exposure degrades materials. Electronic components fail. Seals crack. Bearings wear out. Every mechanical system has a lifespan. And on a generation ship, you can't just order replacement parts. You have to manufacture them on board. That requires raw materials. Where do you get raw materials in interstellar space? You can't. You have to bring everything you might need with you. Or you have to recycle. Every broken component gets broken down into its constituent materials. Those materials get reformed into new components. Nothing is wasted. Everything is reused. But recycling isn't perfect. Each time you recycle a material, you lose a little bit. Impurities accumulate. Structural properties degrade. After being recycled a dozen times, a piece of metal might not be as strong as it was originally. That's a problem when you're depending on that metal to hold the ship together. You need perfect recycling, closed-loop manufacturing, where nothing is lost. We don't have that technology yet. Not at the scale and efficiency required for a generation ship. Maybe we will by the time we're building these ships. But it's not guaranteed. And if recycling isn't perfect, the ship slowly bleeds resources. Material quality degrades. replacement parts aren't as good as originals. Systems become less reliable. Failure rates increase. And over centuries, this degradation compounds. The ship, 500 years into the journey, might be held together with inferior materials. Systems jury-rigged with makeshift parts. Everything functioning, but barely. One unexpected stress. One system pushed beyond its degraded limits, and catastrophic failure occurs. There's also the problem of technological knowledge decay. The ship launches with state-of-the-art technology. The original crew understands that technology. They were trained on Earth by experts. They know the theory behind every system. They can troubleshoot, innovate, adapt, but their children don't have the same training. They learn from their parents, from manuals, from hands-on experience. It's good training, but it's not the same as being part of the civilization that developed the technology. Each generation is one step further removed from the original knowledge base. And with each step, something is lost. Subtleties, intuitive understanding, the ability to think outside the box. By the 10th generation, the people maintaining the ship might be following procedures they don't fully understand. They know that if you do A, B happens, but they don't know why. They can't derive it from first principles. They can't innovate. If something goes wrong in an unexpected way, they're lost. They consult the manuals. But what if the manuals don't cover this specific scenario? What if the situation requires creative problem solving? That requires deep understanding. And deep understanding might have eroded over generations. This is a subtle but critical danger. The ship might be functioning fine, all systems nominal, but the people running it have become caretakers rather than engineers. They maintain, they don't innovate. And when an unprecedented problem arises, they can't solve it. The mission fails not because the technology failed, but because the knowledge to use that technology was lost. Some proposals suggest maintaining a comprehensive digital library. Every technical manual, every scientific paper, every educational resource, all stored in multiple redundant data systems. Future generations can access this information whenever needed. But accessing information isn't the same as understanding it. You can read a manual on quantum mechanics. That doesn't mean you understand quantum mechanics. Understanding requires education, practice, mentorship. It requires an intellectual tradition passed from teacher to student. If that tradition breaks down, the information is useless. It's like finding an ancient library in a language you can't read. The knowledge is there, but inaccessible. So maintaining technological competence across generations requires more than just preserving information. It requires preserving understanding. And that's much harder. Let's consider the communication challenges with Earth. For the first few decades, maybe even a century, the ship can maintain communication with Earth. Messages are delayed by distance. Light takes years to travel between the ship and Earth. But communication is possible. The ship sends updates. Earth sends back advice, encouragement, new information. It's a connection to home. A reminder that Earth still exists, still cares. But as the ship travels farther, the communication delay increases. At 10 light years from Earth, a message takes 10 years to arrive. A reply takes another 10 years. 20 years, for a round-trip conversation. That's slow, but it's still something. The people on board can still feel connected to humanity's home. However, at some point, the delay becomes so long that communication becomes effectively meaningless. At 100 light-years, a 200-year communication lag means that the people sending a message will be long gone before any reply arrives. You're talking to the future, sending messages to people who won't be born for decades, receiving messages from people who passed generations ago. It becomes less like communication and more like historical records. Eventually, communication stops entirely. Maybe the ship is too far. Maybe Earth stops sending messages. Maybe the ship stops listening. Either way, the link is severed. The ship becomes truly isolated. The only humans in an empty void. No connection to Earth. No connection to anyone except the few thousand people on board. That isolation is psychologically profound. Humans evolved as social creatures. We need connection to a larger community. The knowledge that we're part of something bigger. On Earth, even if you live in a small town, you know there are billions of other people out there. Cities, nations, civilizations. You're part of humanity. On an isolated generation ship, humanity is just the people around you. Maybe a few thousand individuals. That's the entire human race, as far as anyone on board knows. That can breed a narrow, insular mentality, a lack of perspective, an inability to see beyond the immediate. It can also breed despair, the knowledge that you're alone, truly, utterly alone, in a universe that's vast and empty and indifferent. Some people cope by embracing the isolation, by finding meaning in the small community on board, by focusing on immediate relationships and tasks. But others struggle. They feel the weight of the void around them, the absence of anything beyond the ship. It's crushing. And when enough people feel that weight, morale collapses. Another issue to consider is the possibility of encountering something unexpected during the journey. Interstellar space isn't completely empty. There are rogue planets, objects ejected from their home star systems, drifting through the void. There are clouds of gas and dust. There are cosmic rays, magnetic fields, gravitational anomalies. Most of the journey will be through relatively empty space. But occasionally, the ship might encounter something. Maybe it's a rogue planet. The ship's sensors detect it years in advance. The crew has time to adjust course. They steer around the planet, avoiding a collision. No harm done. But what if they don't detect it in time? What if the sensors fail? Or what if the object is moving faster than expected? A collision with a rogue planet would destroy the ship instantly. Everyone gone in a fraction of a second. The mission ends. No warning. No chance to react. Just over. That's the nightmare scenario. And it's not impossible. Space is dark. Rogue planets don't emit light. They're almost invisible until you're very close. If the ship's sensors aren't functioning perfectly, if the crew isn't vigilant, a collision is possible. There's also the danger of interstellar gas clouds. Most are thin. The ship can pass through with minimal impact, but some clouds are denser. Passing through a dense cloud at high velocity could be like flying through a sandstorm. Particles impacting the hull at relativistic speeds. Each impact releasing enormous energy. The ship's shielding might hold, or it might not. If the cloud is dense enough, the cumulative impacts could damage or destroy the ship. And you can't avoid gas clouds easily. They're vast, light years across. By the time you detect one, you might already be inside it. Your only option is to slow down, reduce velocity to minimize impact energy. But slowing down extends the journey. More years, maybe decades, added to the travel time. More generations living in transit. More strain on resources and social cohesion. It's a terrible choice. Risk destruction by maintaining speed, or accept a longer journey with all the problems that entails. There's no good answer, just risk management, calculating odds, making the best guess you can with limited information, and hoping you're right. Let's talk about what happens if the ship needs to make an emergency stop. Maybe a critical system fails. The fusion reactor shuts down. Life support is running on emergency power. You have days, maybe weeks, before everyone runs out of oxygen. You need to stop. Find a way to repair the reactor. But stopping in interstellar space is problematic. There's nowhere to stop. No safe harbor. No planet to land on. You're billions of miles from the nearest star. All you can do is shut down the engines. Come to a relative stop. Float in the void while the crew works frantically to repair whatever broke. But without main power, the ship is vulnerable. Life support is limited. Heat is limited. The ship starts to cool. Temperatures drop. People huddle in insulated areas. Rationing power. Rationing heat. Meanwhile, the repair team works around the clock. They know that every hour matters. Every hour the reactor is offline is an hour closer to disaster. They work in near-freezing conditions, exhausted, under immense pressure. And they're trying to repair a system that's centuries old, with parts that might not be original, with tools that might be makeshift. If they succeed, the ship powers back up. Life support stabilizes. Heat returns. The journey continues. But if they fail, everyone is gone. They freeze. Or they suffocate when the oxygen runs out. The ship becomes a tomb, a lifeless hulk drifting through space forever. Eventually, millions of years from now, it might encounter another star system. Aliens, if they exist, might find it. A relic from a failed mission. A monument to human ambition and tragedy. This is why redundancy is so critical. You need backup systems for everything. Multiple reactors, multiple life support units, multiple everything, so that if one fails, another takes over. But redundancy adds mass. And mass requires more energy to accelerate. There's always a trade-off. More safety means more cost. Less safety means less cost, but higher risk. Engineers designing generation ships have to navigate these trade-offs constantly. And the consequences of getting it wrong are catastrophic. Now, let's imagine a different scenario. The journey goes well. No catastrophic failures. Social cohesion holds. The ship arrives at the destination star system, 800 years after departure. 30 generations have lived and passed. The people on board have never known anything but the ship, Earth, is ancient history. A place from stories, nothing more. Their identity is tied to the ship, to the mission, to the destination. They're almost there. Excitement builds as the star grows brighter. Sensors begin detailed scans of the system. They identify the target planet. Data pours in. Spectroscopic analysis of the atmosphere. Surface temperature readings. Magnetic field measurements. Gravity calculations. Everything looks good. The planet is habitable. Not Earth-like, but close enough. Breathable atmosphere. Liquid water. Temperatures in a range humans can tolerate. This is it. The promised land. The reason for everything. 800 years of sacrifice. And it's finally within reach. But here's the problem. The people on board have adapted to life in space. Their bodies have changed. Generations of living in artificial gravity, lower than Earth normal, have weakened their bones. Their muscles aren't as strong. Their cardiovascular systems aren't conditioned for full gravity. When they descend to the planet's surface, they're going to struggle. Walking will be exhausting. Standing for long periods will be painful. Some might not be able to adapt. Older individuals, people with health issues, might be unable to leave the ship at all. They'll remain in orbit while the younger, healthier colonists descend. And those younger colonists face their own challenges. The planet's ecosystem is alien. The microorganisms in the soil, the air, the water, are unlike anything they've encountered. Their immune systems have no experience with these pathogens. They might get sick, severely sick, allergic reactions, infections, diseases with no name. Some colonists will adapt. Their immune systems will adjust, but others won't. They'll suffer chronic illness. Some will pass. It's a brutal selection process. Only the fittest survive. And the unfit? They're gone. The genetic diversity of the colony shrinks even further. There's also the question of the planet's native life. If there's an ecosystem, there might be predators. Creatures that view humans as prey, or as competitors for resources. Early colonists might be attacked, lost, and the colony has limited weapons, limited means of defense. They're vulnerable. Settling a planet isn't like arriving at a prepared destination. It's like stepping into a wilderness. Dangerous, unpredictable, hostile. You have to learn the rules, figure out what's safe and what's deadly. And you learn by making mistakes, by losing people. It's a hard lesson, and it takes time. Meanwhile, the ship remains in orbit. Some people refuse to leave. They've spent their entire lives on board. The ship is home. The planet is alien, scary, unknown. Why risk it? They want to stay on the ship, live out their lives in the environment they know. But the ship wasn't designed to remain operational indefinitely. It's degrading. Systems are failing. It needs maintenance, repairs, resources from the planet. Staying on the ship long-term isn't viable. Eventually, it will become uninhabitable. Everyone will have to leave. But convincing people to leave before that happens is difficult. They're scared, and fear is a powerful motivator. It keeps people from taking necessary risks. So you have a split. part of the population on the planet, struggling to establish a foothold. Part of the population on the ship, clinging to familiarity. And the two groups start to drift apart. Different priorities. Different identities. The planet-siders see themselves as pioneers, the future. The ship-siders see themselves as preserving what's been built over centuries. Tensions arise. The planet-siders need resources from the ship. Equipment, supplies, people. The ship-siders are reluctant to give them up. They need those resources to keep the ship running. Arguments ensue. Maybe even conflicts. And the colony, barely established, fractures. This is the reality of arrival. It's not triumphant. It's messy, difficult, fraught with new challenges. The journey's end is just the beginning of a whole new struggle. And there's no guarantee of success. Many colonies might fail. The planet turns out to be less habitable than thought. The colonists can't adapt. Disease wipes out too many. The ecosystem is too hostile. The colony dies. And the ship, degraded and failing, can't leave. Can't find another destination. Everyone is trapped. On a dying ship in orbit around a planet that rejects them. They're gone within a few generations. The mission, after 800 years, fails at the finish line. That's the nightmare. And it's not implausible. Colonizing a planet is incredibly difficult, even when you have support from an established civilization. Mars colonization, even with Earth's backing, would be a monumental challenge. Now imagine trying to colonize an alien planet with no support, no resupply, no rescue. Just a few thousand people and whatever they brought with them. The odds aren't good, but maybe they succeed. Maybe, against all odds, the colony takes root. People adapt. The planet becomes home. Children are born on solid ground. They grow up under an open sky. They've never known the confinement of the ship. To them, this is normal. The planet is home. The ship is a relic, an artifact from a bygone era. Eventually, the ship is abandoned, stripped of useful parts, left to orbit, empty and lifeless. A monument to the journey. And the colony grows. Generations pass. The colony expands. New settlements are established. A civilization emerges, different from Earth, shaped by the unique environment of this alien world, shaped by the hardships of the journey and the settlement. They remember Earth, in stories, in records, but it's not their home. This is their home, and they're no longer human in the way people on Earth are human. They've diverged. Genetically, culturally, psychologically. They're a new branch of humanity, adapted to a new world. This is the long-term outcome of generation ships, if they succeed. Not a continuation of Earth's civilization, but the birth of something new, something that carries the legacy of humanity, but is also distinct, independent. Perhaps one day, thousands of years from now, this colony will build its own ships, send its own explorers to other stars, and the process repeats. Humanity, or our descendants, spreading across the galaxy. One painful, centuries-long journey at a time. It's a vision that inspires some. The idea of humanity becoming a multiplanetary, multi-star species. spreading life and intelligence across the cosmos, ensuring that even if one world fails, others continue, that our legacy endures. But it's also a vision that demands incredible sacrifice. Generations of people living and passing in transit, never seeing the destination, never receiving recognition or reward, just fulfilling their role in a chain that spans centuries. Is that noble? Or is it tragic? Maybe it's both. There's another terrifying possibility. What if, during the journey, humanity back on Earth develops faster than light travel or some other breakthrough technology? What if, centuries after the generation ship departed, Earth sends a faster ship that overtakes it and arrives at the destination first? The generation ship arrives to find a thriving colony already established. Their entire purpose, the sacrifice of dozens of generations, rendered meaningless. They're not pioneers. They're relics, obsolete before they even arrive. This scenario has been explored in science fiction, but it's based on a real concern. Technology advances. What takes 1,000 years with current technology might take 100 years with future technology, or 10 years, or 1 year. The people on board the generation ship wouldn't know. Communication with Earth would be possible, but limited by the speed of light. Messages take years to travel. By the time you receive a message from Earth, it's years out of date. You might learn that Earth has developed better propulsion, but by then, it's too late. You're already committed to your journey. There's no turning back. You just have to hope that you still matter when you arrive. And there's a darker thought. What if Earth forgets about you? The mission was launched with great fanfare. Humanity's first attempt to reach another star. But after decades, the excitement fades. New priorities emerge. Earth faces its own challenges: climate change, political conflicts, resource depletion. The generation ship becomes a footnote in history, a mission from a bygone era. People stop thinking about it, stop talking about it. Eventually, it's forgotten entirely. And you arrive at the destination, expecting some kind of acknowledgement, some connection to humanity's homeworld. But there's nothing. No messages. No follow-up missions. Earth has moved on. You're alone. Truly alone. The last remnant of a forgotten mission. That isolation could be devastating. The psychological impact of realizing that no one remembers you, no one cares, would be profound. Depression, nihilism, collapse of purpose. Why continue? Why settle this world? For whom? These are the kinds of thoughts that could break a society. Now, let's talk about something even more disturbing. The possibility that the mission never should have been launched in the first place. Imagine that the star system you're traveling toward was chosen based on the best data available at the time of departure. Telescopes observed the star, detected planets, analyzed their atmospheres using spectroscopy. Everything suggested habitability. But that data was limited. You can't see a planet in detail from light years away. You make educated guesses. And sometimes, guesses are wrong. You arrive and find that the supposedly habitable planet is nothing like what was expected. Too hot, too cold, toxic atmosphere, no water, completely uninhabitable. The mission was based on a mistake. Centuries of travel, generations of sacrifice, all for nothing. What do? You can't go back to Earth. The ship doesn't have enough fuel or resources for a return journey. You can't travel to another star system. You're stuck. You're in an interstellar void with nowhere to go. The only option is to try to survive in space indefinitely. Live on the ship forever. But the ship wasn't designed for that. It was designed for a journey with an endpoint. Systems are degrading. Resources are finite. Without a planetary base to resupply from, the ship will eventually fail, and everyone on board will be gone. This is the nightmare scenario. The mission fails not because of human error or social breakdown, but because the fundamental premise was wrong. The destination was never viable, and no one knew until it was too late. Could this happen? Absolutely. Our current understanding of exoplanets is limited. We can detect planets around other stars. We can estimate their size, orbital distance, sometimes atmospheric composition. But we can't see their surfaces. We can't study their geology, their ecosystems, their weather patterns in detail. We make inferences based on limited data. And inferences can be wrong. A planet that looks habitable from 4 light-years away might be a hellscape up close. We won't know until we arrive. And if we send a generation ship, we're betting centuries of human life on those inferences being correct. That's a terrifying gamble. Another issue: mutation and genetic drift. Over hundreds of years, the population on board will evolve. Mutations will occur, some beneficial, some harmful. In a small population, harmful mutations can spread more easily because there's less genetic diversity to dilute them. You could see an increase in genetic disorders, inherited diseases, reduced fertility. This is called inbreeding depression. It's well documented in small, isolated populations. Island species often show signs of it. Royal families that practiced inbreeding for generations experienced it. Higher rates of genetic disorders, reduced lifespan, decreased fitness. A generation ship is an isolated population. Without intervention, genetic health will degrade over time. You need active genetic management. Screening embryos for harmful mutations. Selecting for genetic diversity. Maybe using genetic engineering to correct problems. But genetic engineering comes with its own risks. Unintended consequences, ethical concerns, social resistance. Not everyone will agree that modifying human genetics is acceptable. You could have factions on board who oppose genetic intervention on moral or religious grounds. And if those factions gain power, they might ban the practices necessary to maintain genetic health, leading to long-term population decline. Fewer healthy births, higher infant mortality, shorter lifespans. The population dwindles. Eventually, it falls below the minimum viable size, and the mission fails. Radiation exposure is another long-term concern. Even with shielding, some radiation gets through. Over decades, cumulative exposure increases cancer risk. It damages DNA, leading to mutations. Those mutations get passed to the next generation. Over centuries, the cumulative genetic damage could be significant. Higher rates of cancer, birth defects, neurological problems. The population's health deteriorates. Medical resources are strained. Quality of life declines. People suffer, and there's no escape. You can't leave the ship. You can't reduce radiation exposure beyond what the shielding already provides. You just have to endure. For generations. Watching your health, your children's health, slowly degrade, knowing that it's going to get worse, not better. That's a psychological burden on top of a physical one. Let's talk about the economics of generation ships. Building one would be monumentally expensive. We're talking about a structure miles long, equipped with life support for thousands of people, propulsion systems, power generation, manufacturing facilities, all built to last for centuries. The cost would be in the trillions, maybe tens of trillions. That's more than the GDP of most countries. Who pays for it? Governments? Private companies? A consortium of nations pooling resources. And who decides where the ship goes? Who gets to board? These are political questions as much as engineering questions, and they don't have easy answers. You'd need international cooperation on a scale never before achieved. Countries that can barely agree on climate policy would need to agree on funding and crewing a mission that won't bear fruit for centuries. Why would any government invest resources in something that won't benefit their current population? The people who fund the mission will be long gone before it arrives. There's no political payoff, no votes to be won, no economic return. It's an investment in the distant future. And humans, especially politicians, are notoriously bad at long-term thinking. We struggle to address problems decades away. A generation ship mission is centuries away. Getting political and financial support seems almost impossible. Unless there's a crisis. A threat that forces humanity to think long-term. Maybe Earth becomes uninhabitable. Climate change spirals out of control. Or an asteroid impact is imminent. Or a nuclear war devastates the planet. In a crisis, people might support a generation ship as a backup plan. A way to ensure human survival even if Earth is lost. But even in a crisis, building a generation ship takes time. Decades, at least. Maybe centuries. By the time the ship is ready, the crisis might have passed, or it might have already killed everyone. Timing is everything. And we don't control the timing of crises. There's also the question of who gets to go. If you're building a ship for 1,000 people and billions want a chance to leave Earth, how do you choose? Lottery. Merit-based selection. Wealth? Political connections? Any selection process will be controversial. People will argue that it's unfair, that the wrong people were chosen, that the selection criteria were biased, and they might be right. How do you fairly choose 1,000 people to represent all of humanity? You can't. Any choice will exclude the vast majority, and those excluded will resent it. They might try to sabotage the mission, or demand changes to the crew, or protest and delay the launch. The social and political challenges of launching a generation ship might be harder than the engineering challenges. Now, let's consider the perspective of someone on board. You're born 30 years into the journey. Your parents were part of the original crew. They chose to board the ship, knowing they'd never return to Earth. They accepted that sacrifice. But you didn't choose. You were born into this. You grow up hearing stories about Earth. Green forests, blue oceans, open skies. Places you'll never see. You see recordings, simulations, virtual reality recreations. But it's not the same. You know, intellectually, that Earth exists. But emotionally, it feels like a myth. A story from the past. Your world is the ship. Metal corridors. Hydroponic farms. The hum of life support systems. This is your reality, and you know you'll never leave it. You'll live here for 70 years, maybe 80. You'll work, probably in agriculture or engineering or medicine. You'll have relationships, maybe start a family. You'll have children who will also live their entire lives on board. And eventually, you'll be gone. Your children will continue the journey. Their children will continue. And maybe, centuries from now, your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will reach the destination. But you won't. How do you find meaning in that? How do you wake up every day and go to work knowing that your entire life is just a small part of a journey you'll never see completed? Some people find meaning in being part of something larger. They take pride in their role. They understand that without them, the mission fails. They're essential. That gives them purpose. But others struggle. They feel trapped. They resent being born into a mission they didn't choose. They wish they could have a choice. But there's no choice. You can't leave the ship. There's nowhere to go. You're billions of miles from the nearest planet. Even if you wanted to leave, you couldn't. You're stuck. For life. And that realization that you have no agency, no freedom to choose your own path, can be crushing. It can lead to depression, apathy, resentment, and those feelings can spread. One person's despair affects those around them. Morale drops. Productivity declines. Social cohesion weakens. And the mission becomes harder to sustain. This is why mental health is critical on a generation ship. You need psychologists, counselors, support systems. You need cultural practices that help people cope with confinement and lack of agency. You need rituals, celebrations, things that give life meaning beyond just survival. But even with the best support, some people will struggle. And in a population of 1,000, even a small percentage, struggling can have significant impacts. 10% of the population dealing with severe depression is 100 people. That's 100 people not contributing fully. 100 people who might need care and support. 100 people who might make poor decisions. It's a burden on the entire community. And it's ongoing. Every generation will have people who struggle. You can't eliminate mental health challenges. You can only manage them and hope that the support systems hold up across centuries. Let's talk about the information problem. A generation ship is traveling through interstellar space for hundreds of years. During that time, it's receiving information from Earth and from the destination star system. But that information is years out of date. Light speed delay. A message from Earth takes years to reach the ship. By the time the ship receives it, the information is old. Earth might have developed new technologies, discovered new information about the destination, or even launched newer, faster ships. But the generation ship doesn't know in real time. It learns years after the fact. This creates strategic problems. Should the ship alter its course based on new information? Should it slow down, speed up, change destinations? Every decision is made with outdated information. You're flying blind, in a sense, making choices based on data that might no longer be accurate. And there's no way around it. You can't communicate faster than light. You just have to accept that you're always operating on old information and hope that it's still relevant when you arrive. There's also the problem of technological obsolescence. The ship is built with the best technology available at the time of launch. But technology advances. By the time the ship is halfway to its destination, Earth might have developed far superior systems. Better life support, more efficient propulsion, advanced medicine. But the ship can't upgrade. It's traveling through space with no way to receive physical supplies or new equipment. It's stuck with what it launched with. And as that technology ages and becomes outdated, the ship falls further and further behind. The people on board know this. They receive messages from Earth describing new breakthroughs, new capabilities, and they realize that they're using obsolete equipment, that their entire mission is based on outdated technology, that if the mission were launched today, it would be better, faster, safer, but they're stuck with what they have. That knowledge can be demoralizing. It reinforces the feeling of being left behind, of being obsolete, and it raises questions. Should Earth send supplies somehow? Can they? If Earth develops faster propulsion, could they send a resupply ship to catch up with the generation ship and deliver upgrades? In theory, yes. But in practice, it's complicated. Matching velocity with a ship traveling at a significant fraction of light speed is difficult. Transferring cargo in interstellar space is risky. And by the time Earth develops the capability to send a resupply mission, the generation ship might be so far away that it's not worth the effort. So the ship is likely on its own, forever, using technology that becomes more obsolete with each passing year. Let's consider the cultural evolution on board. A generation ship starts with a culture imported from Earth. The original crew brings their language, values, traditions, beliefs. But culture isn't static. It evolves. Over generations, the culture on board will change. Language will drift. New words will be created. Old words will change meaning. Eventually, the language spoken on board might be barely recognizable compared to the language spoken on Earth. Values will shift. What the original crew considered important might be viewed differently by their descendants. Traditions will change. New traditions will emerge, unique to life on board the ship. Old traditions will be forgotten or modified. After 500 years, the culture on board will be distinct from Earth culture. The people on board won't think of themselves as humans from Earth. They'll think of themselves as ship people, a separate identity. And that identity might not include any loyalty to Earth or to the mission's original purpose. They might develop their own priorities, their own goals, and those goals might conflict with the mission. This is cultural drift, and it's inevitable. You can try to preserve Earth culture through education, recordings, rituals, but you can't stop change. Culture evolves. And after enough generations, the culture on board will be something new, something that might not value the mission the way the original crew did. This raises a question. If the people on board no longer identify with Earth, if they've developed their own distinct culture, do they still have an obligation to complete the mission? Or can they choose their own path? It's a philosophical question, but it has practical implications. If a generation decides to abandon the mission, to stop traveling toward the destination and instead settle somewhere else, or just drift indefinitely, what happens? The mission fails. Centuries of effort wasted. But, from their perspective, they're exercising agency. They're choosing their own future instead of being bound by decisions made by ancestors they never knew. Who's right? There's no clear answer. It depends on your values. And that's part of what makes generation shifts so troubling. You're asking people to commit to something that spans centuries. But people change. Cultures change. And there's no guarantee that future generations will share the values and priorities of the first generation. Now, let's talk about the math of survival. For a generation ship to succeed, it needs to maintain a viable population for the entire journey. That means birth rates need to match or exceed the rate at which people pass. If more people are gone each year than are born, the population shrinks. Eventually, it drops below the minimum viable size, and the mission fails. But maintaining stable population growth in a closed system is tricky. Resources are limited. You can't support infinite growth. But you also can't afford decline. You need to hit a narrow target. Enough births to replace losses, but not so many that you exceed carrying capacity. And you need to maintain this balance for centuries. Any deviation accumulates over time. A small decline in birth rate, just a few percentage points, compounds over generations. After 200 years, the population might have dropped by half. That loss of genetic diversity, of skilled workers, could be catastrophic. Similarly, a small increase in birth rate leads to overpopulation. Strain on resources, food shortages, social conflict. The ship becomes overcrowded. Quality of life declines. People suffer. You need precise control over population growth. And that control needs to be maintained by every generation. One generation that drops the ball, that allows population to grow too fast or decline too much, can doom the mission. That's a huge responsibility. And it's ongoing, forever. There's no room for error. Let's imagine the final approach to the destination. The ship has been traveling for 1,000 years. 40 generations have lived and been gone. Now, finally, the star system is in sight. Telescopes on board can see the planets in detail. One of them looks promising. The right size, the right distance from the star, spectroscopy shows oxygen in the atmosphere. It could be habitable. Excitement builds. For the first time in living memory, there's hope. The journey is almost over. But there's also fear. What if it's not what they hoped? What if the planet is uninhabitable? What if there's some unforeseen danger? The ship begins deceleration. This is a critical phase. The ship has been accelerating for centuries, building up to a significant fraction of light speed. Now it needs to slow down. That requires enormous energy. You can't just hit the brakes. You need to fire engines in the opposite direction, burning fuel, generating thrust. This takes time. Decades, maybe a century. The ship has to start decelerating well before it reaches the star system. Otherwise, it overshoots, flies past the destination at high speed, unable to stop. During deceleration, stress on the ship increases. Structural loads from braking thrust, heat from engines running continuously, wear and tear on systems that are already centuries old. This is when failures are most likely. A critical system breaks during deceleration, and the ship can't slow down properly. It misses the destination, or it arrives but crashes into a planet because it couldn't brake in time. After 1,000 years of travel, the mission fails in the final stretch. That would be the cruelest outcome. To come so close, only to fail at the end. But assume deceleration succeeds. The ship enters orbit around the destination planet. Sensors scan the surface. Data pours in. The planet is evaluated. Is it habitable? Can humans survive there? The answer determines everything. If yes, preparations begin for colonization. Landers are prepped, supplies loaded, colonists selected. The first group descends to the surface. They land, step out, breathe the air. If they survive, more follow. A colony is established. The mission succeeds. But if the planet is uninhabitable, if the data was wrong or conditions changed, the mission has failed, and there's nowhere else to go. This is the terrifying reality of generation ships. You're committing to a journey spanning centuries, betting everything on a destination you've never seen, trusting that the information you have is accurate, that the ship will survive, that the people on board will maintain cohesion, that nothing catastrophic will happen. It's an enormous gamble, and the stakes are the highest imaginable. Thousands of human lives, generations of people born, living, and gone in transit, all for the hope of reaching a new world, a hope that might not be realized. Despite all these challenges, some scientists and futurists still advocate for generation ships. They argue that it's the only realistic way to spread humanity beyond our solar system, that the risks, while enormous, are worth taking, because the alternative is staying confined to Earth and our immediate neighborhood, vulnerable to extinction from asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, pandemics, nuclear war, climate change. A generation ship, even with all its flaws, represents a backup plan, a way to ensure that some portion of humanity survives, even if Earth doesn't. From that perspective, the suffering and sacrifice of people on board might be justified. They're ensuring the continuation of the species. That's a noble purpose. But it's also a utilitarian argument. It values species survival over individual well-being. It asks people to sacrifice their entire lives and the lives of their children for the sake of distant descendants they'll never meet. Not everyone agrees that's acceptable. Some argue that it's unethical to impose such a burden on people who didn't consent. The original crew chose to board the ship, but their children didn't choose. Neither did their grandchildren. You're creating generations of people whose entire existence is defined by a mission they didn't agree to. Is that fair? Is it moral? These are questions without easy answers. They touch on fundamental issues of autonomy, consent, the value of individual lives versus collective goals. Different people will come to different conclusions, but they're questions we need to grapple with if we're serious about generation ships. Because building the ship is the easy part. The hard part is justifying what we're asking people to endure. In recent years, some have proposed alternatives to generation ships: suspended animation or cryogenic freezing. Put the crew in stasis for the journey. They don't age, don't consume resources, don't experience the psychological burden of confinement. They go to sleep on Earth and wake up at the destination. From their perspective, the journey is instantaneous. This solves many of the problems we've discussed. No need for generations of people living on board. No social cohesion issues. No cultural drift. Just a crew that launches and arrives intact. But cryogenic freezing has its own challenges. We don't currently have the technology to freeze and revive humans without causing damage. Ice crystals form in cells, rupturing membranes. Metabolic processes can't simply be paused and restarted. There are biological barriers we haven't overcome. Maybe we will someday. Research into cryopreservation is ongoing, but it's not guaranteed. And even if we develop the technology, it comes with risks. What if the revival process fails? What if people wake up with brain damage, memory loss, physical impairment? What if the systems maintaining the stasis fail during the journey? Everyone is gone, frozen in their pods, unable to wake up or repair the problem. At least with a generation ship, there are conscious people on board who can respond to emergencies. With everyone in stasis, the ship is on autopilot. If something goes wrong, there's no one to fix it. Another alternative is sending robotic probes instead of humans. Robots don't need life support. They don't get lonely or depressed. They can operate for decades or centuries with minimal maintenance. Send a fleet of robots to a distant star system. Have them build infrastructure, prepare the environment. Then, once everything is ready, send humans in a much shorter, safer journey. Or don't send humans at all. Send the robots as our representatives. Let them explore, gather data, send it back to Earth. Humanity learns about distant worlds without risking human lives. This approach is appealing. It's safer, cheaper, less ethically complicated. But it's also less human. There's something about humans physically traveling to distant worlds, setting foot on alien soil, that captures the imagination in a way that robots don't. We want to explore, not just send machines to explore for us. There's a desire to expand, to spread, to see new worlds with our own eyes. Robots can't fulfill that desire. So, despite the challenges, despite the terrifying reality of what generation ships would entail, the idea persists. Because it represents something fundamental to the human spirit. The drive to explore, to push boundaries, to reach beyond what's currently possible, even if the cost is enormous, even if the sacrifice is almost unimaginable. So, where does this leave us? Generational ships are theoretically possible. We have the physics. We understand the engineering, at least in principle. We could, if we committed the resources and effort, build one. But should we? That's the question. And it's not a question with a clear answer. It depends on what you value. If you value species survival above all else, if you believe that spreading humanity to the stars is essential, then generation ships might be justified. The suffering of those on board is tragic, but it's a price worth paying for the continuation of humanity. If you value individual autonomy and well-being, if you believe that people shouldn't be born into missions they didn't choose, then generation ships are ethically problematic. You might argue that we should wait for better technology, for alternatives that don't require such sacrifice. Both perspectives are valid. Both have merit. And that's part of what makes this topic so difficult. There's no obvious right answer, just trade-offs, costs and benefits, risks and rewards, and the stakes are as high as they can possibly be. The future of humanity, the survival of our species. the possibility of life spreading beyond Earth to the stars, all balanced against the lives and well-being of thousands of people who would be asked to endure centuries of confinement, isolation, and sacrifice. It's a heavy burden, and it's a decision we might have to make someday. Maybe not in our lifetimes, maybe not for centuries, but eventually, if humanity survives long enough, we'll face this choice. Do we build generation ships and send people to the stars? Or do we accept our limitations and stay close to home? What would you choose? Would you board a generation ship, knowing you'd never reach the destination? Would you condemn your children to a life on board, hoping that their descendants might one day walk on a new world? Or would you refuse, valuing your freedom and theirs over the mission? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have easy answers, but they're worth thinking about, because they reveal something profound about who we are and what we value. They force us to confront the tension between individual desires and collective goals, between the immediate and the long term, between the comfort of the known and the allure of the unknown. Generational ships are a mirror. They reflect our ambitions, our fears, our willingness to sacrifice, our desire for meaning and purpose. They show us the best and worst of humanity. The courage to undertake an impossible journey, and the cruelty of asking others to bear the burden of that journey. The dream of reaching the stars, and the nightmare of what it would actually take to get there. So yes, generation ships are terrifying. Not because of the engineering challenges, though those are real. Not because of the vast distances, though those are daunting, but because of what they ask of us. They ask us to commit to something we'll never see completed, to sacrifice our lives and the lives of generations of our descendants for a goal that might never be achieved, to live in confinement, isolation, and uncertainty for centuries, to trust that it's all worth it. That's the terrifying truth about generation ships. They're possible. We could build them. But the cost isn't measured in dollars or resources. It's measured in human lives, in generations of people who will be born, live, and be gone in the darkness between stars. And that cost might be too high, or it might be the price we have to pay to survive, to spread, to become a species that isn't confined to one fragile planet orbiting one ordinary star. Only time will tell. But the question remains, would you go? Would you board a generation ship, knowing everything we've discussed tonight? Knowing the risks, the suffering, the uncertainty? Or would you stay behind, watching as others take that journey, wondering what might have been? It's a question worth considering, because someday someone might have to answer it, and their answer will determine whether humanity remains a single planet species, or becomes something more, something that spans the stars, no matter the cost. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. If you found this journey thought-provoking, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue exploring these profound questions about humanity's future among the stars. And remember, the universe is vast and beautiful and terrifying. And we're just beginning to understand what it would take to truly explore it. Sleep well tonight, knowing that the stars are still out there, waiting. Whether we'll ever reach them remains to be seen. But the fact that we can imagine it, that we can plan for it, that we can grapple with the profound challenges it presents, shows something remarkable about humanity. We dream of the impossible. And sometimes we figure out how to make it real, even when the reality is terrifying.